It's really a shame that I don't have pictures from before the work began in this hallway. The earliest picture I have is this one during the middle of the tear out. It's a huge dusty mess. Look at how low that ceiling is. Even though it's a plaster and lath ceiling, so it must be pretty old, it's not the original. Above that, there's a 9-foot plaster and lath ceiling. This shows you what it looks like after all of that lath was ripped out, including that low ceiling. The new electrical is in the walls. There used to just be one sconce. I've added a second, and there's also a new receptacle wired in. And by the way, if you're ever wondering what I do with all of that lath board that I rip off the walls, I never throw that into the dumpster. I always save it in my backyard wood pile. Here's the remainder of the pile that I have from the bathroom and hallway tear out. It's covered under a pretty thick layer of last autumn's leaves. Wooden lath is super dry and it burns really well in the fire. All right, back to work. This area is going to be finished with plaster, which requires a special type of drywall called plasterboard. And check out that old floor. Planks running in 2 directions, notches where stub walls used to be. No problem. We're just gonna cover over it with a laminate to match the dining room. And be sure to give the floor a good cleaning before starting the project. You don't want any loose debris getting in your way when you're putting down the new flooring planks. Next, it's time to put down the underlayment. Some floors require this and some don't. Be sure to use the specific one recommended by the flooring manufacturer. This particular underlayment added about 80 cents per square foot to the flooring cost. The first piece of flooring to go down is one of the trickier cuts. The jamb stop is still a little too low here, so having an oscillating tool is really handy on a flooring project. The hallway floor can't actually be tied into the dining room floor, in part because they're not level with each other. We'll build a custom threshold for this transition in part 2 of this video series. Now I'll set up a laser to align the first row of flooring. This will help me know how wide to cut my first pieces, since the hallway wall bows inward in the middle. And we build out the rest of the floor. I'll speed through this part, since there are plenty of excellent videos on YouTube that detail the tools and techniques of installing click-lock laminate floors. So the flooring in the hallway went down smoothly enough. But now we're getting to the finish work in the hallway. We're talking about the wood trim for the door, the baseboards, and the threshold between the 2 sections of flooring. And these are the spots that a lot of people dread when working with older homes, because it's in this finish work where all of the unevenness shows up. Notice how the door jambs stick out substantially from the plaster. This means that when we put the door trim on, we're going to have a pretty big gap between the plaster and the trim. But that's not the worst part about it. It's because the amount that the jambs stick out isn't uniform across the whole door. In this part, the door jamb is almost flush with the plaster. If you go down just a little bit, it sticks about 1/4 inch out. If it were just an issue of this side being higher than this side, there are some factory products that we could maybe purchase to solve this. But our issue here is that it's not a uniform difference across the length of this. On this side, the two sides of the flooring are flush with each other. On this side, we have a difference of about 1/4 inch. So in this video, I'm going to show you some tips and some techniques that you can use and have in your arsenal whenever you see this type of unevenness in the finish work on the renovation of an older home. Now let me show you how the trim looks like in the rest of the house to set up how we're going to do this. We have the door trim itself, which looks like just regular 1x4. Then we have this decorative side piece here, which sticks out a little bit from the regular trim. So we're going to begin by installing the 1x4, and then we'll cut a smaller piece that attaches to the wood trim around the perimeter. A lot better for smoothing this out. Rough 40 grit paper. We already have the wood. It's out in the car. Let's go grab that. Now, we're gonna do the painting inside here, but some of the boards are gonna go out to the garage first because we wanna route the baseboards before we paint them. And I have it at the right height, so I'm going to put one nail into the middle, and that way we can really get it leveled right. Exactly level. Notice we do still have a big gap behind it. Don't worry about that. We're going to take care of that in just a minute. I'm going to go out and cut the two side pieces now, and we'll get those installed right away. All right, so now we're going to put in a piece of backing wood to secure it behind this seam right here. To sturdy this up and add a little backing here, I'm just putting little pieces of scrap wood there and then nailing through. A really easy way to do this, just take an old scrap of 2x4 that you have, cut it at various widths like this, just like little shims, and then just slide it in until you find where it fits. Normally it would make sense to wait until we're done with all of the door woodwork to do the puttying and sanding, but because we're going to be adding this little perimeter piece that sticks out right here, it would be a little bit difficult to sand in this inside corner. while that wood putty sets up, the next thing I'd like to do is work on this perimeter piece. Ideally, the way we could do that is take this piece of wood, push it against our wood trim, then just take a little tracer block like this at the amount we want it to stick out and just trace it down the board all the way and cut it out. It's not going to be quite that easy though in this case. And this is what drives people crazy on older homes. This left wall here bows out substantially in the middle of the wall. I'll show you what I mean. If we take our board here and place it tight up against the trim and we kick it in all the way on the bottom, we're left with a substantial gap on the top. If we push it in tight on the top, a little harder to see down here, but we're left with a big gap on the bottom. The gap is probably more than 1/4 inch, so it's too much to just split the difference. The line I traced on this board really shows you how the wall bows out in the middle. So it's really mainly just this part in the middle that I'm gonna have to cut out with the jigsaw so that it sits against the wall flat. The putty is dry and ready to be sanded. It says to wait a half an hour to sand. I usually wait a bit longer than that. Actually, this was waiting overnight. We want to sand it with a pretty fine grit paper, probably at least 150. The thing is, when you have a fine grit paper, you're going to make fine dust that likes to blow all over the house. So keep your vacuum cleaner handy. The perimeter boards for the door trim are fresh in out of being sanded in the garage, and they fit pretty nicely. Of course, we'll have to make the miter cuts at the top. For the other side, fits about the same with maybe almost 1/4 inch sticking out, which is exactly what we wanted to match the pattern we have on this side. All right, just went out to the garage to make those miter cuts and I fit them in place already. I think they're gonna fit pretty nicely. So all we gotta do is nail these in. And when nailing these in, it's really important that the miters are what you're paying attention to on either side. So what I do is I line one up so that it looks pretty much as perfect as I can get it, and I make sure this corner is in. Then I go over to this side and do the exact same thing. Now I've already tested these. I already know that they fit nicely. It's important to check that first. If they don't, then you've got to go back and fix something. But these look like they fit pretty nice. I'm gonna nail them in right now. All there is now to do is a little bit of touch up. And we've done touch up a bunch of times already, so I won't film all of that, but there's 1 or 2 steps that deserve an honorable mention on this. One is on the miter joints. Be sure to go over that with a little bit of 220 grit sandpaper, just lightly, and you'll have those joints looking pretty much flawless by the time you're done. The other thing I want to mention is that this corner right here is a factory corner. The issue with those is that they're pretty sharp and they like to chip, indent, and splinter really easy. So I always like to just go over those also very lightly with some sandpaper, just like this. And that's probably enough just to round off that edge a little bit. Other than that, I'm just gonna do a little bit of puttying and sanding, and it's gonna be ready to paint. It was a big job, but this door is finally trimmed out. But the fun doesn't stop here. Stay tuned for the next part of the video when we will add the baseboards and 2 custom thresholds for this floor. See you next time, everyone.